Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is a long-standing British politician. He has held many senior cabinet jobs. He's been in the Treasury, he was the Culture Secretary, and he was the Health Secretary under Gordon Brown. But then he stood for the Labour leadership, lost to Ed Miliband and then to Jeremy Corbyn, and then left Westminster and went to be the Greater Manchester Mayor, where his profile over the last year has been enormous as he's fought for his position through the pandemic and the position of the people he represents. People now often, sometimes jokingly, sometimes seriously, call him the King of the North. So Andy Burnham, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, for having me, Krishnan. And I've left the crown in the cupboard today. So
yeah, you're at home. It's interesting talking to you this week because there was some research published by Frank Luntz, the pollster. He said he found that if you put to people why they think politicians are in politics, they overwhelmingly seem to think that politicians are in it for themselves now. Why did you go into politics?
To make things better, fairer. I was growing up in the Northwest in the 1980s, so those were my formative years. And it wasn't a great place to be. As you might remember, Moss Side, Toxteth, miners' strike, and then Hillsborough at the end of that decade. It was a really tough decade in my part of the world. And then by a lot of luck, but obviously, hopefully some ability, got into Cambridge University. And I kind of saw a different world. I thought, hang on a minute, there's other people living a very different life in this country than the people I've kind of known and grown up with. And I guess that was when I really became, is radicalised the right word? It kind of was really through that Hillsborough experience as a 19-year-old at Cambridge, because that's when it happened to me. And I guess I was on a political path from that moment in time. As I then went into politics, I kind of saw that kind of gap between ourselves and the public was getting bigger all of the time, and the distrust of people's motives in politics. What I would say, Krishnan, knowing people in Parliament, as I do on all sides, and I did have friends on all sides, the truth is the vast majority of people do go in to do something good as they see it. And somehow the Westminster system, in my view, kind of changes the way that comes across because of the way it works. And it leaves people distrusting that world.
In those early years, I mean, if you were sort of radicalised by the miners' strike and then, university and Hillsborough and all of that, what was more important? Was it what you were against or what you were for?
I was very much, in my early years, just desperate for a Labour government. And I have always taken the view that a Labour government of any variety is better than a Conservative government. So basically work for one. However, it kind of governs, it's still going to be better.
Are you sure that's true?
I'm less sure
government is better than any.
Less sure that that's true as I've got older, but I still think it is just about true. I'm not as tribal now as I was in my 20s and even my 30s. I was still quite tribal at times, and I was very much the team player, Labour, and we've got to stick together, win together. And in that period, I in the early 90s, I was just desperate to see a Labour government. I was absolutely completely shattered by the defeat in 1992. I was a 22-year-old, had just found my first job in London. I was kind of in touch with everybody back at home in the Northwest, and it was a sort of disorientating part of my life when I was living in London, seeing life there and knowing what life was like for many people there back at home. And I was just thinking, this is it, Neil Kinnock's going to win, and finally some of these things we've lived through, things are going to change. And that I couldn't understand how the country didn't vote Labour in 1992 with everything that had happened. And I remember feeling profoundly depressed about that for some time. It was like a bereavement to me, that election. I mean, I've always been to the left of New Labour, no question, but I kind of moved my thinking a little bit. So, well, you just have to get elected. You do have to get elected. You can't sort of stick out on principles if you can't persuade the country. So I kind of absolutely bought that. And I think it's like a band really. Early New Labour was really good because there was some quite strong policies in that first manifesto, and it kind of the later albums became a bit bland, middle of the road, I think.
Now, as Labour sort of fumbles around trying to work out what it's about, a lot of people are saying well, New Labour didn't stand for anything. What was underpinning New Labour for you, in those years? Was there something substantial, something substantive that was really trying to change the world?
Oh, it was. No, I think that there was something really profound about it. Because obviously, coming from where I'd come from, I didn't know anybody growing up or in my kind of ambit who didn't want governments and police to be tough on crime. Nobody I knew wanted a sort of soft, because of crime affects sort of working class communities more. So when Tony Blair said that, I was like, oh, well, and my mum was like, finally, they're sort of, because my mum and dad always voted Labour, but I kind of often thought they're in a slightly different world to where a lot of their core voters are. And also, Labour in that period then started to talk seriously about opportunity for all, around more people going to university. If you look at the 1997 manifesto, I think it was powerful. The problem with New Labour was, one of the problems, Labour was so desperate to show that it could be accepted by the establishment as a governing force that it didn't use the leverage the public had given it to change the establishment and change the country a bit, is my take on it. It just wanted to be accepted by it. And therefore it was just too cozy, too close, almost from the beginning, I think. And it needed to keep a bit more of a kind of, radical edge about, look, this country doesn't work well for everywhere and everybody. And there needs to be some substantial change. And I think quickly that was there pre-election quickly got lost. And I think now when you look at England today and it's so unequal, so divided, Labour really didn't do enough, I think, to change the sort of wiring of the UK to make it work for all parts of the country equally.
I mean, do you think that's partly because a lot of Labour politicians don't really believe that they are going to get that power? There's a bit of imposter syndrome with some sort of Labour, sort of when am I going to get found out? How have we got this? How have we got power now? They don't have that entitlement that arguably people on the other side have about the right to rule the country.
I think that's beautifully put. Yes, exactly, absolutely. And I remember as a minister myself feeling a bit of that, and I think that happens at every level of Labour politics. I think sometimes councillors get elected and kind of, because they haven't been to university, don't feel they can challenge council officers. I think it kind of runs deep in the Labour movement, that thinking. But where we've been at our best is when we've kind of shaken that off and, stood up to it, as early New Labour did in some ways. I'm not saying by any means it was all bad. They were trying to find an accommodation, I think, between being radical and Labour, but also running the country. And I think they in time drifted too far towards, becoming to establishment sort of friendly. But I think you put it very, very well. I think that imposter syndrome definitely, it certainly ran through me whenever I was in Parliament and some of the situations I found myself in. But Labour's got to find the right point of balance. That kind of sweet spot that the post-war government found. That is where Labour wins. I
mean, you certainly don't look like you have imposter syndrome now. So how have you shed it? And what's changed?
Because I'm in an environment now that I know and is home, and I'm with people that I know, and so I kind of feel different in the world I'm in now to the one I was in. I always did feel like an outsider in Westminster. I don't know how much that came over, but I did. David Blunkett warned me about that when I went in. He said, this place isn't kind on accents. You're not necessarily going to kind of feel like you fit here. It was only later in my political career when I made speeches in Westminster that I actually kind of gave them without any kind of sense of lack, where I wasn't sort of worried about the environment. It took me a long time to kind of feel that in the House of Commons. But if you look at some of my later speeches, I was absolutely just, found my voice, if you like. But it was late on, and people maybe had already formed the views of the earlier person that they saw in that environment.
But what you don't have is the power to solve the real problems that's a lot of the real problems that you see around you when it comes to deprivation, jobs, health, all those sorts of things. You've got some powers, but not the transformative powers that you would have in government. So how does that feel?
True, you're absolutely right. But I do have some power, and it's true of being a minister. When you're even a Secretary of State, you have some power, but not everything that you need. So I am used to that situation, and you have to make the best of what you've got. We have made some real changes in Greater Manchester on homelessness. We've significantly reduced the number of people sleeping rough. And that wasn't considered at the time something that we would be able to do. People were skeptical about our ability to do that.
How have you done it?
A number of ways, Krishnan. I mean, to be fair to the government, some help from them, the Housing First scheme that we've got, which is really working. But the main thing is our own initiative to create a scheme called A Bed Every Night, which is a network of provision across all 10 districts of Greater Manchester, all councils buying into it. We find room for 600 people every night. And the thing about A Bed Every Night is it's the same bed every night. So we're not passing people from pillar to post. They come in and then they have a base where they can kind of stay and get that sort of breathing space to recover and then make a positive move forward. So it really is working. It's hard to sustain it financially, but we're also working really hard to do that.
And what is the missing bit in order for you to be able to deliver on your pledge to end rough sleeping?
We're getting close, to be honest. I mean, we are down to double figures now. We don't just sort of tell others to go and do things. We live it as well. I go out and do walkabouts to city centre. I'm trying to demonstrate a form of political leadership here that is about deeds, not words, in the words of the suffragettes. Live it as well, show it. And I donate 15% of my salary to the Greater Manchester Mayor's charity to show that, I'm not asking anybody to do anything I'm not prepared to do myself. To be honest, I think we know we can do it now. A Bed Every Night creates that stability, as I was saying, and then people recover. If you give people stability, they will recover. The government has actually helped us create some successful approaches here, and we just need to make them permanent, probably increase the funding and remove really iniquitous policies like no recourse to public funds. No recourse to public funds means that people who do not have agreed immigration status in this country, a council cannot legally put them up somewhere, or they can't access the system. That is the law of our land. We legalise destitution. It's an unbelievable thing, really, that in this country we allow that. The question I put back to the government is, how can you have a policy nationally of everyone in or ending rough sleeping, and also have a policy of no recourse to public funds? Because by definition, some people will still be on the streets if you have that policy. We try and fund them charitably, but you can't be certain that you can achieve that. So that, I think, is a policy that needs to change. Greater Manchester accepts more people seeking asylum than anywhere else in the country. In fact, the Home Office almost takes us for granted with that. And we don't think we're treated fairly, actually. It's doubly unfair when they have that policy and also a policy of no recourse to public funds, because our councils are left dealing with issues that go way beyond what we've got the resources to deal with.
What do you think of the Borders Bill then at the moment, and the approach to asylum?
It's breaking with British tradition, basically. I know the government are just fighting every culture war that they can, but the history of this country has been to accept people here seeking asylum. I just think it's not what we've done as a country. We have played our part in that endeavour, and we've been applauded for doing so, and rightly so. And I just think in this moment, when they're fighting these culture wars, they're kind of, it's a false pretense, isn't it? Because they're kind of almost saying that they're true Britain, that this is the flag and this is us and we're getting it back to us. But actually they're then bringing policies in that take it away from us, that give a different impression of Britain to the world as being more narrow-minded and more xenophobic. So I think we've got to kind of call out these culture wars. Look at that England team. They've shown a lot of politicians up, to be honest, in that they've withstood the calls from Tory MPs to stop taking the knee and just done it. And, that's working class lads from all parts of England sticking together, white teammates backing black teammates over it. Fantastic. What a fantastic thing. And, I think the left has got to kind of take heart from that and, start fighting back against policies which are definitely being introduced to create division and create a reaction and fuel this culture war, which will get us nowhere if we carry on down that path.
So that's interesting. So you think the culture wars do need to be taken on, because a lot of people are now arguing that the way Labour needs to respond to the culture war is basically to sort of not get drawn into it, don't get sucked into it, sort of ignore it in a way, and it might go away. But are you saying actually it's better to stand firm and take it on when you disagree?
I think it's a bit of both, actually, Krishnan. I don't necessarily agree with people who say just don't take it on, because obviously they're creating these false things, aren't they? Kind of issues that then meant to get a reaction from, and I don't think the left always should just jump into that trap. What I do think is when something is plainly wrong, then absolutely take that on. So when Tory MPs say it's okay to boo the England team, you jump in and you go, no, it's not. You never boo the national team when they're about to kick off in a tournament, a major tournament. Never. And they've called that one wrong. And I think, pick our moments, but absolutely, when the moment is right, if something is wrong just from a sort of basic humanitarian point of view, or actually someone's made a wrong call, as they have done over that, so absolutely confidently step into that space.
We're recording this, of course, just before the final of Euro 2020. We'll put this out afterwards. But I wonder what you think the political impact of this competition is going to be. Given England's got this far, regardless of how they do, there is going to be some sort of lasting effect on the country, isn't there? What do you think it is?
I think it's just so positive what they've brought, isn't it? We felt it in 2018 with the way Gareth approached the World Cup, but it's got stronger, hasn't it? And this is an England team you can believe in. The way they go about things, character of the players. Obviously we've got a prime example here in Greater Manchester with Marcus Rashford, and we couldn't be more proud of him, but also Raheem Sterling, the way he's emerged through this tournament. It is like that 66 team who were quite ordinary lads then themselves, weren't they? They were drawn from, I love Jack Charlton. I've been struck by looking at some of the footage of him post 1966, where he just went back with his feet up in his mum's room, smoking a fag and, going to watch the Greyhounds. It brings me back to that in some way. I know these lads are fabulously more well paid than those, but there is a connection there that they're rooted. You can believe in them. They are unifying, and I hope there is a political impact in that it might take us away from some of the divisive nonsense that has been poisoning politics actually for at least a decade now.
When it comes to the things that still motivate you, though, are they the same things that motivated you as a youngster? We haven't talked about childhood, if you like, and what was going on around you that you used to find so appalling. And I just wonder whether it's the same things now that it was then.
It is. It's very much, and it is connected very much to the North. If you want to sort of pick a word out that probably characterises me, and sometimes is made, professional Northerner, I can be mocked for, and I don't mind a bit of that, because I've made my own a rod for my own back with that, my famous love of chips and gravy, which is paraded once or twice, but is actually true. But we'll leave that where that is. It is the North. In the sense of that feeling of going to Cambridge and seeing that different world, and then trying to connect it to the world where I'd grown up, and just totally being unable to do that.
What was it that was so different?
The thing that my dad said to me before I went, because I wasn't going to go, I'd got an offer at Newcastle and I was very keen to take it up. And my dad was saying, no, you've got to go. It will open so many doors for you. And actually, when I graduated, it was that moment of graduation that brought over to me that it wasn't quite what I thought, in that I was at college with people, and I think probably at least achieved as much as they did while I was there. And I just saw people walking straight out into Goldman Sachs, The Guardian, The Times, the BBC, and I was writing CVs to all of these, not Goldman Sachs, but all the media. I wanted to work in the media at the time, and just zero was coming back. And I was just thinking, hang on a minute, why aren't these doors opening for me? My dad said they would. And obviously what that came over them was the connections, the networks that run this country. And I think that is a very big part of why we are such an unequal country. And that was a theme. I'm not sure how many people remember my 2010 Labour leadership contest, but it went under the banner of aspirational socialism, which interestingly was picked up by another candidate in the 2019 election. But that was when the phrase was coined. I spent a lot of that contest talking about what I described as kids without connections. We had to help kids without connections, i.e. ban unpaid internships anywhere. All positions anywhere have to be advertised, that kind of thing. I was massively against the scrapping of the education maintenance allowance, which was a lifeline actually to working class kids that I knew in the Lee area, accessing the college that they wanted to go to. You take that away, they have to lower their horizons at age 16. That's why I've introduced a free bus pass for 16 to 18-year-olds in Greater Manchester, so that that stage of their life they have got full support to to follow their dreams, etc. And then also the notion when I left, eventually got a job after graduation, I really resented the fact that I had to move to London to do that job. I didn't want to, actually. I wanted to stay in Manchester. I couldn't, because I just couldn't find a job there that was what I wanted to do. So there's been this thing, hasn't it, as long as we've been around, that if you want to get on in life, you've got to go to London. And that really stuck in my throat, to be honest. Since
the 2019 election, the overarching story of politics has largely been about the Red Wall and about how much this government is doing to try and shore up the Red Wall and what happened. And as traditionally Labour voters turned to the Conservative Party in that election and to Boris Johnson. But at the same time as that, you have had personally, and others have, in individual seats, this huge, overwhelming vote for you as well. So how are these two things coexisting? How are you getting a huge Labour vote in Greater Manchester at the same time as the Red Wall was collapsing?
People were drifting away from Labour before 2016, but for some people, the Brexit referendum was an emotional break. And let's be honest, a lot of people in my former constituency didn't relate to the former leader. And so there was, at that time, an emotional break was made with the party. Not everywhere, but certainly in those, most, you could say, traditional Labour seats. And they were often the mining seats, likely, because they have a small c social conservatism. And I always, as the MP, spoke a little bit to that, because I have it myself, because I grew up in that area. I am tough on crime. I don't make any bones about it. I am patriotic, and I always respected the fact that was kind of the mindset of the people that I represented. And I just think in those areas, the emotional disconnect with Labour was greatest. How to get it back? See, this is where I think the Tories are again fighting the wrong battle with their culture wars, because it seems to me they are underestimating massively working class communities in the north of England, because they are basically saying they're all xenophobic, possibly racist in some ways. Therefore, we are going to kind of sell them this thing and I think that it's insulting to those communities. The Red Wall, as if it's a homogenous group of people who just have unthinking, uncaring. Nothing could be further from the truth of the communities of Lee that I know so well. In fact, the communities of the north of England know so well. And this is where this is going to kind of come unstuck, as far as I can see. Having left Westminster and all the stuff that goes on there with the lines that you have to agree with and all the rest of it, I've just come back from a bottom-up, place-first approach. I don't do a party-first approach in my role as Mayor of Greater Manchester. I do a place-first approach. I am for this place. I will speak for this place. I will do what I can to make this place better, and what I've passionately believed all my life it could be if it got the right support. And I think when you start from that, you can provide a more connected, authentic representation. So when the Tier 3 debate came last year, I could see what the government was doing was so wrong, because, why does somebody who worked in a pub get 67% of their wages when everyone else was getting 80% of their wages? So I've always done this thing in my life in politics. People claim that I jump on bandwagons and all. I don't actually. I wait. If I know something is absolutely wrong, then I will go at it with all of my political tools, if you like. And I did speak for people working in pubs who were about to have their workplaces closed, or people driving taxis, people who often don't get spoken about when big debates are happening. And I think there was a sense here that the North had been treated very differently through 2020 during the pandemic. Things had just been dumped on us. That then became a moment of kind of representation when everyone could buy into it, from former Labour voters, even some Conservative voters, I think, bought into it, because I think people felt it needed saying. Most people.
I mean, some people did accuse you of using it, didn't they? I mean, how did you feel about that? That you were being accused of using the pandemic to build your own profile.
I mean, it was just untrue. The ministers who said some of that know it's untrue, because I was in behind closed doors meeting with them 2 weeks before that began, saying we are not necessarily against Tier 3, but you cannot do it without the right support. So we were put under restrictions without funding in July. Bolton had its hospitality closed in September with no compensation at all. And then we go into October. And I said, look, you cannot close a place down like Greater Manchester, where our case rate is high, our death rate is high, people are suffering. You cannot do that without giving us proper support. And that went through a series of meetings, with Deputy Chief Medical Officer, with senior people in number 10, all trying to be resolved behind the scenes, and they just were not budging. In those circumstances, I've been around long enough in politics to know that at some point you try and do it the right way. If they won't listen to you doing it the right way, you go out there and you make it quite clear what you think is right and what you think is wrong. And they were wrong to do what they did to us. They claimed to be a government for the North, and they were imposing on the North strictures that were going to damage people's lives. So I don't care what they say. Jacob Rees-Mogg claimed I was acting when I saw the text message. Well, the head of my office will tell you that that was nothing of the sort. Matt Hancock down in London was briefing MPs as I was speaking outside the Bridgewater Hall, and he told MPs that they were going to impose Tier 3 and there wouldn't be any more support. And they were going to take off the table what they put on the table as part of those negotiations. If some people were saying to me, "Oh, don't speak up too loudly because government will close off support over here and over there, and you'll fall out with them." But if the English regions always have to go on bended knee to Whitehall, and Whitehall holds all the power and doesn't want anyone ever to answer it back, well, this is why you end up with a very unequal London-centric country. So actually, I really thought carefully about it, and I thought to myself, no, this is a massive point of principle, both for working class people, but also the north of England, and I am going absolutely to stick to my guns, and I'm going to call it out.
So do you think we need to change the way Britain is governed? I mean, do you think we need a lot more devolution? And if so, what? Massively
so. Yeah, massively so. I mean, Westminster has created a huge north-south divide over centuries. It's created a very unequal England. And let's put Devon and Cornwall in that, and parts of East Anglia and parts of Essex. There is a very unequal country here. If you look at the map of where the COVID cases are highest, you've got your map of where the inequality is greatest. The political system has not delivered. All parts of England are not represented equally in Parliament. Devolution to all parts of England. We believe in Greater Manchester, with our place first approach, we are creating a better, more involving form of politics where we can do more for ourselves that's right for us. And I think the vote at the mayoral election suggests that people are saying, yeah, okay, we can see that, and we like it, and we want a little bit more of that. And Steve Rotherham got something of the same, and to be fair, Andy Street got something of the same. There's a buy-in, I think, a growing buy-in to English devolution.
So what powers need to transfer?
We should have control of post-16 skills. The economy is different in different parts of the country. We need to train young people in Greater Manchester for the jobs that are actually there, rather than the courses that that get dictated from a national level. I think we need much more borrowing power. If I did, I would immediately start building homes for social rent across our city region. We need to control our transport system. We have a situation where we control the tram, but not the buses. Only London controls its buses in terms of setting fares and setting routes, because Margaret Thatcher deregulated buses outside of London in the 80s. I've taken a decision to bring buses back under public control, and we're on with doing that now. But trains need to be brought under public control so we can have one integrated transport system. This is one of the most obvious examples of inequality in England, Krishnan. Why does a single bus journey in London cost £1.55, but over £4 in some of the most deprived parts of the north of England? So these are the kind of unfairnesses that Parliament never seems to get around to debating. When has Parliament had a debate on bus fares in the north compared to bus fares in London? I've not heard it recently. So I think devolution is bringing different issues to the table.
Do you think devolution is possible everywhere, even where there isn't a large metropolitan city that would dominate?
I definitely do, because people focus on mayors, but you need to look at what's underneath the mayor. And what's underneath the mayor is something called a combined authority. So in our case, 10 councils have decided to come together and create one Greater Manchester combined authority. And you can create clusters of local authorities all over England to fill in that map. And I think our devolution is superior to both the devolution you've got in London and the devolution you've got in Wales and Scotland. The difference between what we have in London is our councils are the GMCA. So the councils are the members of the GMCA. In London, the GLA, the Greater London Assembly, sits on top of authority, sits on top of a council base that isn't, it's disconnected from that council base. So the strength of our system is, if we decide to prioritise something like homelessness, the whole of the public sector in Greater Manchester will move in that direction and moves as one. And that, I think, makes it superior. And the reason why what we've got is better than what Wales and Scotland have got is, of course, that's devolution to a national level. We have got devolution way beneath that to the city region level. And I take the very strong view, that the 21st century economy will be very much driven by cities and city regions as the early adopters of green technology and new transport that will help the country hit the 2050 target.
Do you think there is currently a danger that Labour will never be back in power?
I don't think Labour can take anything for granted about its future at the moment, given the way things have changed over the last decade. And, I think when we lost that election in 2010, if you'd have said to me then that we'd be in the position that we're in today, I'd have found that thoroughly depressing and quite hard to believe, actually, that we could be where we are. But no, I don't take the completely pessimistic view. I'm not saying it's not serious. I think this government is storing up a lot of problems for itself in the way that it's approaching this divisive culture war politics I was talking about before, which ultimately won't resonate, I don't think, with the country. But then secondly, I think in the same way that Labour policies shaped post-war Britain, I think Labour policies can shape post-pandemic Britain, because it is obvious we need to build homes for social rent at scale. It is obvious to me that we need to make social care free on NHS terms to people, to build a more resilient health system coming out of this. It's obvious to me that we need to have an end to the 0 hours culture in the workplace that has meant so many people haven't been able to take time off work if they've had COVID. Labour is more likely to have the answers to the post-pandemic rebuilding we need to do than a Conservative Party, which already seems to be heading back to some form of austerity.
Although, well, I mean, you say that, but the Conservative Party in many ways is governing a bit like a Labour government, in terms of sort of the amount of money it is spending and has spent. I mean, I just wonder how much you worry about this realignment that people talk about, there's a possibility Labour basically becomes the sort of the middle class lefty party, and the Conservative Party sweeps up the working classes because it's spending so much.
I see that. And, I think there's a risk for Labour within that, absolutely. But I've been trying to say to you in this discussion that I think it's on a false premise. That they don't understand working class communities. As I say, they think they're sort of xenophobic kind of mass of people who don't. It's actually, as I say, frankly, completely insulting, and actually through time will be shown to be such. But I'm not saying it's not dangerous for Labour. It is. Labour's got to not get so tangled up in identity politics and sometimes looking like it only speaks for minorities. As important as those minority rights are, by the way, I'm not in any way saying that they're not. If you're going to talk about the scandal of social care pay, which actually is an issue about women's pay, it's a more unifying way of kind of raising issues, if I can put it this way, than talking just about women's pay. Because then underpaid men in the North will say, well, who's talking for me? Labour's not talking for me anymore. Labour's got to kind of think about how it's come over to people in recent times and start to sort of reunite its kind of working class support with its perhaps more middle class support. That is the only way that Labour wins, actually.
I mean, you've been reasonably candid, asked recently, about whether you want to come back, whether you want to lead Labour again one day, and all of that. In terms of not challenging Keir Starmer directly, but saying, look, if the circumstances are right, then you would do it, and you'd be interested. But you say it would be very different this time. How different would it be?
Well, I just want to make clear that I am going to serve a full second term as Mayor of Greater Manchester. I support Keir. I want him to win the next election. And, I am not plotting any return to Westminster anytime soon. I think what I'm building here in Greater Manchester is the future, actually, of English politics. This is the bit that has got hope around it. I'm talking in the future, way beyond this Parliament. I think I know now what a new constitutional settlement would look like to create parity for the North and fairness, not just for the North, but for other underrepresented parts of the country. The whole thing needs rebuilding. What I, in the end, found so frustrating in Westminster was the timidity of the place, the soundbite nature of it, the failure to face up to big issues with big solutions. I mean, that modern politics has become, sort of flimsy, really, insubstantial in its thinking. If we're going to hold up the post-war Labour government, you have to say big changes are needed. We need a House of Lords that is equally represents the English regions, all of them. Personally, I've talked about removing the whip system. I think MPs should have more independent authority and stature to use leverage. I think the whip system is a problem, personally. I think it hands a lot of power to the civil service, the unelected civil service, because half the time the governing MPs are just rubber stamping what they think. I do think there has to be quite significant reform. And actually, I'm a late convert. My dad has worked on me all my life to support PR, and I've never been there. But I think in the world we're going into, where, there are more parties around and, there's a more fragmented political scene, you've got to start to think about uniting that progressive coalition of people. Why should we always be under a minority-supported Tory government? UKIP got, was it 4 million votes at the 2015 election, but no seats in Parliament? A political system that delivers that kind of result is going to build resentment, actually, that in the end becomes problematic.
And do you think you always have to lead the country from Westminster? Is it conceivable that you could one day lead a country from Manchester?
Well, I don't know if it's conceivable that I could do it. I would like to think that somebody might be able to do it in the future. See, the reason people often ask me about Westminster, it just implies what's wrong to me, which is it's the only show in town. It shouldn't be the only show in town. I think it's the system that we've got. I can't see it changing in my lifetime, but I can see, in a bit of a distant future, a very different constitutional settlement in England, where we feel a little more like the German arrangement, where there's much more powerful regions, where there's much more parity between Parliament and the regions.
And do you worry about whether independent Scotland, a potentially independent Scotland, changes the equation massively?
I do. I've understood the drive for Scottish independence a little bit more doing the job that I now do. The frustration of the way Westminster treats us. When you're in Westminster, you don't get the full frustration of how it treats people outside of it. So I can see that more, but it doesn't make me want to break up the UK. I'm never going to be declaring UDI and assembling the masses on the M6 to march down. I won't be doing that. I'm proudly British. I know everyone's saying that these days, but I am. I don't parade all of that, but I believe in unions of countries, basically. I voted to remain, a little bit reluctantly, because I saw some of the issues that we had with Europe, but I did vote to remain. So I believe in this union of the United. It's always better working together, always. I had a little taste of what Scottish independence might be like, because without any notification or consultation, the Scottish government imposed a travel ban a few weeks ago on Bolton, Salford and Manchester. And, that didn't feel very good at all, the way that was done. More independence, even within the UK, is just going to be a recipe for conflict and tension, isn't it? And I don't think that is a good thing in the long run. The interests of the north of England are more aligned with Scotland than they are with parts with London and the south. I don't support nationalism of any kind, even if it comes with a slightly more progressive face. I don't support nationalism, drawing lines on the ground and saying people on this side of the line are good people and those on the other side are a bit dodgy. Nationalism does that. It seeks to divide by its instincts. And I never will support any form of nationalism, to be honest with you. I think the answer to create a more healthy UK, where there's less alienation, the alienation that fuels the drive for independence is because places like Aberdeen and Dundee and Glasgow don't have the power at their level to be more agents of their own destiny. And I think deep devolution to all parts of the UK is the answer. And that includes Scotland and Wales as well. We can fix this country. We can bring it back together. We've got the first glimmers of that in the Euros and in what's happening with devolution in Greater Manchester and in Liverpool City region. So there's glimmers of hope, Krishnan, on the horizon. And we've got to kind of make them spark a bigger sort of feeling about a more positive feeling about what the UK can be in this post-Brexit era.
And if you could wave a magic wand and change the world any way you want to, what would you do?
Oh God, there's just a million things I could say to you in answer to that question. So the thing we've got to do is to sort of firstly just understand what we've all lived through over the last 18 months. We've lived through an experience where some people have not been able to protect their own health. And I think that's a warning sign. We've allowed some people to fall below basic living standards from their employment point of view or their housing point of view. And consequently, their health has been compromised as a result of that. So I have thought a lot about this over the years, and I have come to the view that the best health policy starts with a good housing policy. When I was doing my work on homelessness, I went to Finland because Finland were held up to me as, this is the country that's really got a grip of homelessness. And they were the first country to promote this idea of housing first. And when I went there, I thought I was going to visit a project in Helsinki, but actually what I discovered was housing first is a national Finnish philosophy, which says that if people don't have a good, safe home behind them, that is a secure home as well, then they can't really have a good life in any way. They can't have good health. The kids won't get a good education. That is the foundation for everything in life, a good secure home. And when I say secure home, it's one where you can't be evicted at the drop of a hat, as we currently allow in this country. So if I could do one thing, I would adopt that housing first philosophy in the UK. I would make good, decent, secure housing a human right in UK law. And then that would require funding to be released to local authorities all over the country to deliver that right in all communities. And in some ways, it's a step before what people call for, which is a universal basic income, which I also support, by the way. But the guarantee of decent housing, secure housing, is almost the first thing you need to guarantee for people if you're going to build a resilient society and going to have health baked in, promoting everyone's health baked into everything that we do. So that's what I would do. Housing first, a national philosophy, housing a human right in UK law, because it's as essential as universal access to healthcare or education. You'll actually waste money in the health service if you're sending people out of hospital back to poorly maintained private rented accommodation, which doesn't support their health. So it doesn't support good public spending if you don't fix housing for everybody.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for sharing your ways to change the world. I hope you enjoyed that. Our producer this week is Faye White. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.